I was at a high-end networking event recently, watching a man who seemed to be the very definition of a master of the universe. He was lean, impeccably dressed, and spoke with a booming confidence that commanded the entire room. To anyone watching, he was the king of his own kingdom. People hovered around him, hanging on to every word, and he played the part perfectly, flashing a practiced, million-dollar smile. But then I noticed something small. A younger executive joined the circle and casually mentioned a new project that was gaining massive traction, a direct competitor to this man's firm. For just a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His eyes didn't show professional interest. They showed a flash of raw, naked panic. His grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles went white. In that moment, he didn't look like a leader. He looked like a cornered animal. As the conversation continued, he became strangely aggressive, belittling the younger man's points with his sharp, biting sarcasm. It was a complete reversal. The king had vanished, replaced by someone deeply intimidated, someone who seemed to be desperately defending a throne he didn't actually believe he deserved. He was wearing a suit that cost thousands, yet he looked like he was trapped in a suit of armor that had grown 3 sizes too small. That instantaneous shift from total command to frantic defensiveness was jarring. It made me realize that despite his title and his bank account, he wasn't the master of anything. He was a captive to an old reactive program, a survival personality built to protect a wound he had never let heal. He was living in a palace, but his mind was still operating from a bunker. It made me wonder, how many of us are actually occupying our own lives, and how many of us are just exhausted guards watching over a kingdom we've already abdicated? That moment right there, that sliver of raw, naked panic from someone who looked completely untouchable, that's the mystery we're really diving into today.
It's a fascinating and I think a deeply relatable story.
Totally. The question isn't just, why successful people get stressed. It's deeper. It's why a perfectly successful adult in a modern, air-conditioned, totally low-risk environment suddenly flips a switch and reverts to this ancient reactive survival personality.
Mm-hmm.
Why does success so often feel like you're just frantically defending something? It's a puzzle. And for this deep dive, we've gathered the biological, evolutionary, and psychological roadmap to try and figure it out.
And it really is a roadmap. You can't understand that executive's reaction without looking at the deep history baked into our biology. I think it really boils down to 3 sort of conceptual pillars we need to build our understanding on.
Okay, let's lay them out. What's the first pillar?
The first is that core conflict you just described. It's this massive, sustained evolutionary mismatch between our ancient neural wiring and the completely artificial demands of modern life.
Right. So our brains are running an operating system built for the savannah?
Exactly. An operating system for the savannah, but we've plugged it into a 21st century digital network. The two are just not compatible in so many ways.
That sets a pretty dramatic stage. Okay, so what's pillar number 2?
The second is how social competition and status seeking work. It's this fundamental primal desire to be accepted and valued by the group. And that drive, it generates this pervasive, intimidated personality.
So it's less about fighting for food and more about fighting for likes or, for validation.
In a sense, yes. It's about securing your place in the tribe. It's an innate drive for external validation to ensure you belong, because for almost all of human history, not belonging meant death.
Okay, so we have the old brain in a new world and this deep-seated need for status.
Mm-hmm.
What's the third pillar that ties it all together?
The third is the neurobiology itself, the actual machinery in our heads. It's this constant trade-off between the fast, reactive, emotional limbic system, the part that screens danger instantly, and the slower, more controlled, goal-directed prefrontal cortex.
The part that's supposed to be the adult in the room.
It's supposed to be, yes. The part that offers executive control and a calm override. The survival personality, the thing you saw in that executive, emerges in those moments when the limbic system wins that internal battle.
And it seems like it wins that battle a lot more often than we think.
Far more often than we'd like to admit.
Okay, let's start with that first pillar then. This idea of an evolutionary mismatch. Unpack that for us. What's the central claim here?
The claim is really fundamental to everything we're going to talk about. It's that our biology, our bodies, our neurochemistry, our entire stress response system is designed almost exclusively for the lifestyle of a small band hunter-gatherer, the SBHG, as it's often called.
And we're talking about a vast stretch of time here, right?
An almost incomprehensibly vast stretch. This lifestyle covers something like 3 million years of our genus's existence. It's about 99% of our history.
99%. That number is just... it's staggering. It really reframes what we think of as normal.
It completely reframes it. That 99% figure sets the biological baseline. We didn't evolve for desk jobs or social media or the chronic low-level stress of a morning commute.
Right. We evolved to what? Move around, hunt, face maybe short bursts of intense real danger?
Exactly. Short bursts of acute, immediate danger, seeing a predator, a sudden storm followed by long periods of rest, recovery, and social connection. Our biological machinery, especially the complex hormonal cycles that govern our mood and our stress response, is perfectly tuned for that kind of life.
And I think I've seen this mentioned before. The idea that any genetic changes since, say, the invention of agriculture 12,000 years ago are basically insignificant for our core programming.
They're almost purely superficial. Absolutely. The changes we've seen affect our ability to digest milk as an adult, or they give us different skin pigmentations to adapt to different levels of sun exposure around the globe.
But they haven't touched the brain's basic wiring.
Not in any fundamental way. They haven't altered the architecture of the brain, the way we form attachments, or the basic mechanics of our fight or flight response. The software is ancient. The environment is brand new.
Okay, so that brings us back to that executive. When his ancient brain software kicks him into survival mode, triggered by something as small as a competitor's success, what's the biological purpose of that awful feeling, that raw, unpleasant, emotional pain?
The function is motivation. Pure and simple. It's an alarm bell designed to motivate immediate action to solve what the brain perceives as an existential risk.
We usually just think of fight or flight.
It's broader than that. We tend to fixate on fight or flight, but survival mode includes a whole suite of responses. Unpleasant emotions, fear, shame, guilt, self-pity. These aren't glitches, they're features. They're biological signals designed to alert us that survival may be at risk and to force us to do something about it right now.
So the pain is the point.
The pain is the point. It's meant to be so uncomfortable that you're compelled to resolve the threat, whether that means running away, confronting it, or, and this is crucial for social animals, submitting to preserve your place in the group.
That intensity of the pain really seems to spike when the threats involve our relationships. And that gets to a key point about our ancestors. For them, a threat to a relationship wasn't just drama, it was literally a life or death scenario.
It was a categorical survival threat. There's no ambiguity there. For 99% of our history, a human being alone in the wild is a dead human being.
Right.
If you were injured, ostracized, abandoned by your band, your chances of making it to the next day drop to near zero.
So the brain is hardwired to treat, a nasty comment from a boss? Or a fear of being judged at a party with the same level of alarm as being cast out into the wilderness?
Essentially, yes. It treats any threat to a close relationship, a perceived slight, a fear of judgment, social isolation, as an imminent threat to life itself.
Yeah.
And that's why the emotional pain is so immense, so gut-wrenching. The sheer force of that pain is the motivating drive to repair the bond or find new ones to ensure your safety.
And this is where that mismatch becomes just cruel in the modern world. You could call it the irony of isolation. We're surrounded by billions of people, but we're lonelier than ever.
It's a profound tragedy of modern life. Loneliness today is almost never a threat of starvation or freezing to death.
If that executive had been kicked out of that networking event, he would have gone home to a nice house and a full fridge.
He would have been perfectly fine, materially. Yet because of that deep hunter-gatherer heritage, his brain doesn't know that. Being socially isolated, or even just feeling isolated, triggers the survival mode stress state regardless of the actual physical threat.
And that stress state isn't just a feeling, it's a physical event in the body. It starts pumping out hormones.
It's a full-body cascade. Cortisol and adrenaline start flooding the system.
And having that happen once in a while is one thing. But what happens when it's chronic? When you feel disconnected or defensive all the time?
That's where the real damage comes in. That chronic, low-level activation of the stress system takes a profound physical toll. This is why loneliness is now recognized as a major public health risk, on par with smoking or obesity.
How does that work physically?
Well, chronically elevated cortisol, for example, leads to systemic inflammation throughout the body. It can accelerate aging by shortening the telomeres on your DNA, and it directly impairs cognitive function.
So the executive's white knuckles and tight jaw wasn't just in his head.
Not at all. Those were physiological signs that his body had been tricked into a constant low-grade survival panic. This continuous, unnecessary activation is the mechanism that creates and sustains the survival personality in modern life. It just wears the body and the mind out.
Okay, so once you've secured your survival within the group, the next evolutionary pressure is about your place in the group. The focus shifts from just surviving to, well, to social rank.
Absolutely. Once you move into group living, the game changes. Competition shifts from, say, struggles over a piece of territory to very concrete day-to-day struggles for social rank.
Because rank is the new currency.
It's the ultimate currency in a social species. Dominance correlates directly with access to limited resources, better food, safer shelter, more reproductive opportunities, and, crucially, the authority to hand out rewards or punishments.
That creates a really competitive environment, which I guess leads to different psychological strategies.
It does. It leads to the emergence of two primary psychological systems. First, you have the social rank system, which is inherently competitive. It's always scanning the hierarchy, always attuned to threats to your position.
And the other?
The other is the safety system. This one is cooperative. It's the part of us that seeks allies, that wants comfort and reassurance, that builds friendships.
And the survival personality seems to be governed almost entirely by that first one, the rank system. It's just perpetually monitoring its position, ready to fight.
That's the default setting for someone operating from a place of insecurity. They are always checking the metaphorical scoreboard.
So let's bring it back to the executive. He's stuck in this polite networking event. He can't punch the guy who just threatened his rank, and he can't just run away. His escape is blocked.
That is the classic blocked escape scenario. And it's what triggers something called the Involuntary Subordinate Strategy, or ISS.
The ISS, what exactly is that?
It's a deep adaptive mechanism. In early group living, if you lost a contest for dominance, you would undergo this sudden, involuntary change in your physical demeanor to signal complete submission. You'd lower your head, avert your eyes.
And that's good for the group.
It's fantastic for the group. It instantly curbs aggression. It stops fights from escalating and killing someone valuable. The defeated individual signals, I am no longer a threat, and the dominant one gets the message and no longer needs to attack. It maintains social stability.
Okay, but hold on. The executive's reaction wasn't submission. It was frantic sarcasm. It was aggressive. It was belittling. That looks like he was trying to establish dominance, not submit.
And that is the absolute key to why this becomes so maladaptive in the modern world. You're right, his outward behavior was aggressive. But the underlying psychological mechanism is what matters. It's a process of internal inhibition.
Internal inhibition.
Yes. This involuntary process kicks in and it suppresses your exploratory behavior, it curbs your initiative, and it often results in this high state of internal arousal and tension. That's the cornered animal feeling you described.
So you're saying the sarcasm and the belittling was a desperate, maybe even a failed attempt to override that internal feeling of submission.
That's exactly. It's a frantic effort to demonstrate authority when the internal system has already thrown in the towel and is screaming low rank.
Yeah.
The physiological response to being defeated, the rush of adrenaline, the tension, it's all there. But the modern person, especially a high-status executive, can't afford to just roll over and show his belly, so to speak.
So the tension just gets trapped inside.
It gets trapped. And the behavior that leaks out is often brittle, aggressive, and highly defensive. It's the hallmark of internal inhibition being mismanaged. The body is ready to submit, but the false self, the mask of the master of the universe, is desperately fighting to stay on.
And if that state of internal inhibition is sustained over time, I imagine the psychological consequences are pretty severe.
They look eerily similar to what we call depression. And that's because the brain is essentially registering the experience as a chronic state of defeat.
What kind of symptoms do you see?
You see a loss of energy, depressed mood, difficulty sleeping, reduced ability to process information, and critically, a profound loss of confidence and self-esteem.
But this was originally adaptive.
It was. If you were a low-ranking member of a high-risk group, the best strategy for survival was to lie low. Conserve your energy, don't draw attention to yourself, don't take risks. That constrained psychological state kept you safe. In the modern office tower, it's devastating.
There's a concept that regulates this, right? Something called social attention holding potential, SAHP.
Yes, SAHP. You can think of it like a psychological credit score for how much you belong. It's our internal, unconscious estimate of our rank and our worth in the eyes of the group.
And it's linked to how much attention we get.
Specifically, how much positive social attention we can secure. High-ranking individuals, they just naturally get more of it. People listen to them, they seek them out, they affirm their ideas. This positive social feedback confirms their membership in the group, and it actively lowers their defensive arousal. It makes them feel calm and safe.
So a high SAHP means a low baseline of anxiety.
Exactly. And individuals with a low SAHP are stuck in that low-level anxiety state. They're constantly displaying the inhibited defensive behaviors of the involuntary subordinate strategy.
And this isn't just a psychological feeling, it's biological.
It's deeply biological. Our internal estimates of our rank are so closely tied to our physical state that chronic low SAHP can actually lead to depressive brain patterns. The neurobiology itself starts to reflect a state of chronic defeat or submission.
So when the competitor's success was mentioned, the executive's internal SAHP score just tanked.
It plummeted in an instant, and that verbal aggression you saw was him desperately, frantically trying to claw it back. He was trying to get an external fix for an internal wound, not realizing that external validation almost never heals that kind of injury.
If these ancient status anxieties are the trigger, then the mechanism, that instantaneous switch from confident to cornered, has to be purely neurobiological. We're talking about the deep reactive core of our brain, right? The limbic system.
That's the engine room. The limbic system is the engine of our emotional and motivational life. It's sometimes called the paleomammalian cortex, which is an older term because it was thought to have evolved in early mammals to manage things like the fight or flight response, feeding, reproduction, all the core survival adaptations.
So it's the primitive emotional brain.
In a way, yes. Modern neuroscience shows that the brain is far more interconnected than that simple model suggested, but the limbic system is still the critical hub for lower-order emotional processing. It's the circuitry that handles threat detection and assigns emotional meaning to things before our conscious, thinking brain even knows what's happening.
And the sheer speed of that system explains that instantaneous, visceral reaction you saw in the executive. His body reacted before his mind could even form a thought.
Precisely. The limbic system operates on a timeline of milliseconds, which it has to for survival. If you smell smoke, you don't want to engage your slow executive brain to have a debate about whether it's a bonfire or your house burning down. You want immediate physiological mobilization.
And that mobilization is run by a specific system.
It is. It's orchestrated largely by what's known as the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's the master regulator of the body's stress response.
Okay, so walk us through that chain reaction. How does the limbic system actually create that feeling of physical panic?
So a perceived threat like the competitor's success, knocking the executive down a peg, is first processed by a structure called the amygdala. The amygdala, seeing this as a social survival threat, immediately sends a signal to the hypothalamus.
Okay.
The hypothalamus then releases a hormone to the pituitary gland, which in turn releases another hormone into the bloodstream. That hormone travels down to the adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, and signals them to pump out the big stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol.
So it's a domino effect.
A very fast domino effect. Adrenaline gives you that immediate physical surge, the tightening grip on the glass, the increased heart rate. Cortisol is a bit slower, but it prepares the body for prolonged action. It hijacks glucose resources, pulls energy away from non-essential functions like digestion or critically complex decision-making.
So the executive's panic wasn't just a bad mood. It was a full, system-wide physiological response designed for running away from a saber-toothed tiger.
In a suit, yes.
Let's talk about the two most famous structures in the limbic system that are involved here. First, the hippocampus.
The hippocampus is our memory and learning hub. Specifically, it's involved in integrating spatial memory and our personal episodic memories with their emotional context. It's the reason you can recall not just what happened, but where it happened and how you felt during the event.
And it's vulnerable.
It is incredibly sensitive to stress. Prolonged exposure to stress hormones, particularly high levels of cortisol, actually causes the hippocampus to atrophy, to shrink. And that impairs its function.
Which means what in that moment for the executive?
It means that when his stress response spiked, his ability to rationally recall his past successes or to calculate the actual low risk of the situation or even just to learn new information in that moment was severely compromised.
So he couldn't access the memories that would have calmed him down?
He literally couldn't access the complex, rational memories that would have reassured him of his actual competence and security. And that, of course, just accelerates his sense of powerlessness and panic.
Wow. Okay, and then there's the big one, the amygdala, the brain's alarm bell.
The amygdala is arguably the most vital part of the limbic system in this whole story. It's the brain's primary significance detector. Its main job is to charge cues in our environment. It attaches emotional importance to things so that our emotional memories can be retrieved instantly.
So it's constantly scanning for threats.
Constantly. It instantly evaluates social data, faces, tones of voice, perceived challenges. For the executive, the news about his competitor was instantly tagged by his amygdala as a threat cue, a cue that was probably linked to much earlier, maybe even childhood, experiences of defeat or vulnerability.
And it shortcuts rational thought entirely.
It can, yes. It can receive inputs directly from our senses, like our eyes and ears, completely bypassing the higher thinking brain. This allows for that split-second reaction. It's also critical for evaluating trustworthiness. Damage to the amygdala actually impairs a person's ability to judge if someone is trustworthy. They often confuse trust and betrayal. It's supposed to be our internal lie detector that tells us, is this new person safe or are they a threat? For the executive, the amygdala screamed threat, and it completely overrode his professional facade.
The power of this emotional core is really highlighted by its connection to the frontal lobes. I mean, historically, we've gone to some pretty drastic lengths to try and sever that connection.
We have. That's where you see the history of procedures like the prefrontal lobotomy. For severe, debilitating emotional disorders, surgeons would sometimes sever the connections between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex.
And the results?
Ethically, it was a disaster, and the procedure was often devastating. But the outcome showed us something about this balance. By disconnecting the raw emotion from thought, patients often became passive, unmotivated, and lacked any severe emotional swings. It proved that this rapid, essential connection must be present, but it also showed the absolute necessity of a strong regulator.
A system that can override the panic. So if the limbic system is the frantic, ancient alarm, then all the sophistication of modern human behavior rests on having a regulatory system that can hit the pause button and choose a better response.
That's right, and this is the domain of our executive functions, or EFs, and what we call cognitive control.
What are executive functions exactly?
They're a set of cognitive processes that allow us to regulate our own thoughts and actions to support our long-term goals. They are what we use to handle novel situations, any situation where our automatic programming, our old habits don't provide the right answer.
So they're what let us choose how to act instead of just reacting.
Precisely. EFs allow us to manage ourselves in a way that aligns with our goals, even if it feels uncomfortable or unnatural in the moment.
The main struggle here seems to be about overriding prepotent responses. What does that mean?
A prepotent response is any automatic, habitual, or stimulus-driven behavior. If you're on a diet, the sight of a chocolate cake triggers the prepotent response. Reach for the cake.
I know that one well.
We all do. For our executive, the competitor's success triggered the prepotent response. Panic, attack, defend my status. Inhibitory control, which is a core executive function, is the mechanism required to suppress that automatic behavior and insert a rational, goal-aligned choice.
Like maintaining professional composure.
Or reaching for an apple instead of the cake. It's what allows us to choose how we react, rather than just being, as you said, unthinking creatures of habit.
So the prefrontal cortex is literally the physical location of our free will, in a way. It's what separates the civilized, goal-directed human from the cornered animal. Let's dig into the neuroanatomy of cognitive control.
The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is the executive center. It's the newest part of our brain in evolutionary terms, and it's also the last part of the brain to fully mature. Myelination continues well into our third decade of life.
So it's still under construction until we're like 25 or 26.
At least. And we can really look at three key regions that govern our capacity for control. First, there's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC.
What's its job?
The DLPFC is the operational planner. It's associated with what we call online processing, or working memory. It handles planning, reasoning, and critically active response inhibition. When that executive needed to logically assess the threat, form a polite reply, and suppress the urge to be sarcastic, his DLPFC should have been working overtime.
Then we have the social compass, which seems to be what failed so spectacularly in that moment.
That would be the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC. The OFC is our social filter. It plays a key role in impulse control and ensuring our behaviors are socially appropriate.
What happens when it fails?
When people have lesions or damage to their OFC, they become classic cases of disinhibition. They become impulsive, emotionally inappropriate, sometimes aggressive. The executive's inappropriate sarcasm was a classic sign of his OFC failing under the pressure. The social guardrails just collapsed.
And what's the third part of this control system?
That's the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. This region is the brain's conflict detector. It's involved in decision-making and inhibition, but its primary job is to monitor for errors or conflict.
Like the conflict between how he wanted to appear and how he was actually acting.
Exactly. The conflict between the goal project, calm confidence, And the reality, I'm tightening my grip on my glass and feeling panicked. When the ACC detects a conflict like that, it signals the need for more executive functions. It tries to recruit the DLPFC to get things back under control.
It sounds like this beautifully complex, sophisticated control system, and yet it seems to fail us all the time. The primitive panic keeps breaking through. Why is it so vulnerable?
This is the critical trade-off that really defines modern stress. This is EF vulnerability. The executive functions and the entire PFC infrastructure are incredibly resource-intensive. They are biological gas guzzlers. They require vast amounts of glucose and oxygen to run properly.
And they're sensitive.
Disproportionately sensitive to adverse conditions. Stress, sadness, loneliness, sleep deprivation, even minor illness. All of these common modern conditions impair the PFC's function first and foremost.
So the highest functioning, most crucial part of our brain is also the first to collapse under pressure.
It's the first to go offline. Exactly. When the cognitive control system is stressed and struggling, it loses its ability to effectively regulate the lower, more primitive and highly robust systems, like the limbic system. The immediate alarms from the amygdala are suddenly allowed to dominate our behavior without any challenge.
Which brings us back to our executive.
The executive, likely working 80-hour weeks, running on 4 hours of sleep, dealing with chronic relationship stress. He already had a depleted PFC before he even walked into that event. When the external threat arrived, his sophisticated suit of armor just crumbled instantly.
And the primal panic underneath took control.
It took control because the energy-hungry part of the brain that could have provided a rational override had already checked out for the night.
So our whole journey started with this successful person reacting from a place of deep, ancient insecurity. The goal then has to be moving beyond that survival personality, beyond just defense, and towards something like self-actualization.
Yes, the term Abraham Maslow coined. Maslow argued that once our basic needs for safety and belonging are met, the human drive is toward realizing our highest potential.
And what's really striking is that when you look at Maslow's descriptions of a self-actualized person through this evolutionary lens, they sound familiar.
They sound remarkably similar to the characteristics observed in people raised within those small band hunter-gatherer societies we were talking about.
What are those characteristics?
Things like spontaneity, a deep acceptance of self and others, a fierce sense of egalitarianism, and great personal autonomy.
So the suggestion is that the human default setting, if we're raised in the right environment, isn't anxious neurosis. It's confident self-expression.
Precisely. The idea is that a well-raised human operating in a species-typical environment is naturally less neurotic, more virtuous, and more accepting. The constant need for external defense and validation, that's not an inherent human quality. It's a symptom of unhealthy species atypical development.
So if the hunter-gatherer lifestyle provides the baseline for a healthy adult, we need to understand what makes for an optimal childhood environment. This is the idea of the evolved developmental niche, or the nest.
Yes. The EDN, or the nest, is the species-typical developmental system. It's the set of environmental inputs that are required to construct optimal human neurobiology and foster a personality that's free from chronic defensive states.
Because we're born so immature.
Incredibly immature. We require these inputs from our caregivers and our community to build a regulated, calm, and socially adept self.
So what are the specific necessary components of that nest?
Well, there are things that are often in very short supply in modern, incrementally advanced societies. We're talking about a soothing experience around birth, several years of responsive, on-demand breastfeeding, extensive affection, and positive touch.
And it's not just the parents, right?
No, crucially, it includes the presence of multiple responsive allomothers. That means community care from aunts, uncles, grandparents, friends. And then you have positive social support for the whole group, and very importantly, huge amounts of self-directed play out in the natural world.
These are the inputs that build a foundational sense of safety.
They establish a personality that is calm, resilient, and not hair-trigger stress reactive.
So what happens when those elements are missing, which is the reality for so much of the developed world?
That environment is then designated as a species atypical developmental system, or what's sometimes called undercare. Undercare leads to toxic stress, especially chronic stress, during those crucial early periods of brain development.
And this establishes that deficit mode you mentioned.
It establishes a basic physiological and psychological insecurity, a constant feeling that you are fundamentally unsafe, unloved, or unworthy.
This deficit mode is the origin of the executive's deep-seated insecurity.
It is. If a child's authentic emotional core, their true self, is met with what's called negative valence for being herself, if her feelings are punished, ignored, or she's only valued for her performance,
then that true self has to go into hiding.
it must go underground to protect itself. And to secure the necessary social validation and belonging to survive, the child has to present a false self to get by.
And that false self is the survival personality.
That elaborate defensive presentation, the impeccable suit, the booming confidence, the need to command the room, that is the defensive survival personality. The executive's panic was simply his true wounded self screaming from underneath the armor of the false self he had to construct to survive his childhood.
So if the survival personality is a performance, a mask, then Maslow's path to self-actualization is basically the process of trying to resurrect your true self.
It is. It's about retrieving those authentic, genuine feelings and preferences and learning to follow them, regardless of what other people think.
And that must be incredibly difficult work.
It's profound work because it requires you to actively dismantle the defenses that your survival personality has spent decades building. It's a demanding, active process. It's often so much easier to just stay defensive.
Maslow gave some practical advice for this, right? 8 suggestions for shedding that false self. Let's start with the first one. Be here.
Be here is about present, intense awareness. It means experiencing life fully, vividly, and selflessly with complete concentration and absorption.
Losing yourself in the moment.
When you are truly absorbed in a task, a conversation, a piece of music, you are entirely present, and in that moment, you are being wholly yourself. This is a momentary state of self-actualization. It means consciously dropping your defenses, not worrying about how you appear to others, and just throwing yourself into the experience.
Which is the opposite of what the executive was doing, constantly calculating his social rank.
The exact opposite.
Okay, the second point sounds like a daily battle. Choose growth over defense.
Maslow believed that dozens of times a day, every single person faces a choice. Do I move towards self-actualization, growth, and the unknown? Or do I retreat into defense, safety, and fear?
And these are small choices.
They can be tiny, like being honest versus telling a small lie to make yourself look better, or trying a new food, or accepting a challenge at work that makes you nervous. Each time you choose growth, you strengthen the true self. Each time you choose defense, you reinforce the survival personality. It's like exercise for the soul.
Which makes the third point essential. Know yourself. How do you even hear your true self when the false self is screaming so loudly?
This means shutting out all the overwhelming external noise, all the cultural and parental messages telling you how you should feel or behave, and paying relentless attention to your own subtle internal signals.
Like what?
Like asking, do I genuinely enjoy this job, or do I just like the status that comes with the title? Does this food actually taste good to me, or have I just been told it's a gourmet flavor? Maslow urged us to honor those inner reactions instead of suppressing them.
Which leads to the fourth point. Be honest rather than not. That sounds simple, but it must be terrifying for someone whose whole personality is a performance.
It's terrifying because honesty exposes the gap between the false self and the true self. It means avoiding emotional games, refusing to pose for acceptance, and taking radical responsibility for your own feelings and reactions.
So instead of sarcasm, you just say, that comment made me feel angry or threatened.
Exactly. And each time you take that responsibility and admit your truth, you are actively actualizing yourself. That kind of honesty just cuts through all the exhaustion of the survival personality.
And that honesty leads you to the fifth step. Dare to follow your unique path.
If you listen to your inner self and you're honest about your feelings, you naturally get closer to perceiving what is truly better for you, what your unique mission or destiny is. This is the complete opposite of the executive who defines his worth by a generic corporate throne.
And Maslow said this might make you unpopular.
He was very clear about that. Making an honest statement about your path often involves daring to be different, nonconformist, even disliked. If you aren't prepared to be unpopular for listening to your inner self, you will never achieve self-actualization. You'll just be a product of other people's expectations.
The sixth step is a reality check. Self-actualization is process, not just an end state.
It's not a destination you arrive at and then you're done. You don't get a certificate. It is the demanding, continuous practice of living authentically. It's the active verb of living, not the passive noun of being actualized. It requires the constant labor of choosing growth over defense every day.
Then we have number 7, set up conditions for peak experiences.
A peak experience is a moment of intense joy, absorption, and wonder where you feel most wholly and truly yourself. Maslow said we have to actively increase our exposure to situations where we might be surprised by joy.
And part of that is also figuring out what you're not good at.
Yes, dismantling illusions about yourself, learning what your potentialities are not. This helps you direct your energy toward the areas where your true self can actually find deep fulfillment, rather than chasing prestige in fields where you're inherently mediocre, which is what the survival personality often demands.
And finally, the 8th step circles right back to the beginning. Be ready to address your psychopathologies.
To find out who you truly are, you have to expose the psychopathology. The wounds, the traumas, the defenses that were set up against knowing yourself when you were a child experiencing undercare. You have to face the unpleasantness and the primal wounds so that healing can actually occur. Only then can you ensure yourself is not governed by those reactive defensive systems.
But this journey is so personal, and yet the problem feels systemic. The sources point out that modern psychology often ends up just helping people conform to the travesties of the modern situation.
Yes. We teach people stress management techniques so they can better succeed in a system that is inherently making them sick in the first place.
It's a clash of cultural stories.
It's a huge clash. The dominant narrative in most economically advanced nations is what some call the sacred money and market story, or SMM. This story says money is the primary measure of wealth and defines success by numbers, profit, title, net worth.
And it structures society around maximizing those numbers.
It does, but it completely ignores our most basic human needs for genuine relationships, for autonomy, for security. And in the process, it actively destroys the real sources of human wealth, our ecological and social relational systems.
So the SMM story is fundamentally at odds with our hunter-gatherer roots. And so it perpetually triggers the survival personality.
Absolutely, because an SMM culture creates chronic competition and insecurity, even for the people at the very top, like our executive. It's completely opposed to the alternative story, the sacred life and living earth story.
The SLE story.
This is the story that guided most traditional human societies. It measures wealth by the well-being of individuals, communities, and the natural world. It understands that life only exists in community, and well-being happens when the basic needs of all community members are met.
And the problem becomes self-perpetuating through something called the intergenerational cycle of need provision.
It's a closed loop that explains how a sick culture reproduces itself. The culture, which is step 4, determines how basic needs are provided. This profoundly shapes child raising, step 1, whether it follows the evolved developmental niche or falls into undercare.
Which then builds the person.
Exactly. It constructs the psychosocial neurobiological self, step 2, producing either a calm, typical self or a defensive survival personality. This self then impacts adult health and morality, step 3, which in turn feeds back into and shapes the next iteration of the culture, step 4.
So a culture that prizes frantic performance over emotional security produces anxious parents.
Who then create children with compromised developmental nests, who grow up to become anxious adults who perpetuate the same culture of frantic performance.
Maslow really nailed this paradox.
He did. He said, sick people are made by a sick culture. Healthy people are made possible by a healthy culture. Economically advanced nations are often inherently species atypical because they systemically provide undercare. They prioritize work and numbers over relational wealth and emotional presence.
And that leads to this focus on intellect alone, ignoring the body and intuition.
It leads to suppressed natures, which means for the executive, he was likely raised in an environment where his security was conditional on his performance, a classic byproduct of that SMM story. That conditioning built a neurobiology that is perpetually on edge, even when he achieves the very success the culture demands of him.
So the panic we saw in him wasn't really a personal flaw.
It was a predictable, almost inevitable outcome of a deep cultural mismatch. It's the sound of the true self screaming for the relational safety and acceptance that the competitive culture structurally denies it.
So when we connect all these dots, that executive's instantaneous raw panic makes a kind of chilling, perfect sense. His mask of command was just his false self, built by systemic undercare in a species atypical culture.
And when he was challenged, his prefrontal cortex, the regulatory, goal-directed part of his brain, was already so depleted by modern life that it just went offline.
Which allowed the limbic defense systems, hardwired for these ancient life-or-death social status fights, to just seize complete control. He wasn't a master of the universe at all. He was a desperate guard defending a fragile sense of rank, convinced that if he lost his title, he would somehow lose his life.
And this reveals a final, critical paradox about the survival personality. The constant pursuit of external dominance, of maximizing that social attention holding potential, often tragically reinforces the underlying insecurity, the low SAHP that was born from that initial childhood undercare.
So the more you chase external validation, the shakier your internal foundation gets.
Precisely. We seek external affirmation of our worth because our inner foundation is weak. But relying on that external affirmation makes the foundation even weaker. The exhaustion we see in these perpetually stressed, successful people is the exhaustion of constantly defending a life based on the unstable principles of the sacred money and markets story. The true shift begins not with a bigger title or more dominance, but with recognizing that the very structure of our modern culture can be species atypical, suppressing our true autonomous self in favor of a desperate, panicked defense.